The Navy's new shipbuilding plan steps back a bit from the force's 355-ship fleet strategy. The new plan calls for anywhere from 320 to about 370 manned ships. Bryan Clark, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. He's former special assistant to the chief of naval operations and former director of the CNO's Commanders Action Group. Bryan, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. More numbers floating around here than I ever anticipated regarding the Navy fleet. What do you see in the new shipbuilding strategy?
Well, thanks for having me on, Francis. It's great having these talks over the years. Today, the Navy's strategy has changed once again to drive down to a lower number of ships overall, it seems, but with a very wide target, as you noted. A couple of the major things that jump out of the shipbuilding plan is a significant reduction in the number of surface combatants that they're planning to have in the future, from about 130 in today's fleet down to about 100 in the future fleet. Also, they're going to keep the number of submarines rising over the course of the next 20 to 30 years. So going from about 55 ships today up to about 66 ships out in the future. So they're going to prioritize undersea as an element of their new strategy. Carriers actually fared okay with the number being between 9 and 11, which today the number is 10. And if you count the Ford when it's finally going to deploy, then we can get back up to 11. So that number is about the same. So it seems like the strategy of the Navy is to stick with the kind of the platforms that got them here, the carriers and the submarines, and then use the surface combatants to support them. And then the other elements of the fleet, the unmanned part of the fleet, will grow to try to improve the ability of the fleet to get the persistence and the coverage that it would otherwise have had with manned platforms.
There's a chicken and egg problem here, though, Bryan, and actually it goes three ways. Instead of just chicken and egg, we have some other factor we have to figure out how to throw in there, because we have this shipbuilding strategy that is now different, I think, than both what Congress has indicated is willing to fund and the national defense strategy. How does one reconcile all three of those things to figure out, as you said, we've changed it again?
Right. And so what's interesting is there really is no strategy to back up this change in the overall force architecture. So we did the Battle Force 2045, or the Future Naval Force Structure Study last year. We did that based on a certain assumption about the national defense strategy being in place and a way of warfighting that was going to focus on deterring China through denial, essentially. This new shipbuilding plan and the reduction of numbers doesn't seem to align with that approach because you are reducing the number of surface combatants significantly and the number of unmanned platforms from what we had in that previous plan from last year. So it's unclear what the strategy is. This fleet is probably not going to be able to support the national defense strategy as written today. So the new national defense strategy will have to somehow provide an articulation of how this fleet's going to operate. And it seems like a lot of what they're going to focus on is using undersea in order to create uncertainty for China as a way of deterring China, rather than showing China the ability to defeat them outright. So it seems like it's a shift from a more kind of hard attrition-focused strategy, if you will, down to something that's focused more on creating uncertainty and impacting Chinese decision-making.
One of the things that I love about having you on this program is you take me where I want to go before I can even ask you to take me there. What does this say then about what we can expect to see in a Biden administration national defense strategy?
Yeah, so I think you're going to see some of this, I don't want to say reverse engineering to support the force structure that they can afford, but by establishing the top line where they've essentially set a limit on how big the military can be. And even with the Navy getting a larger share of the overall budget, you can see the Navy is still going to shrink relative to where it was expecting to be and even where it is today in some ways. So the strategy is going to have to back up that and support it by articulating a way of fighting that's going to be more focused on creating this level of uncertainty and confusion and complexity for an opponent like China, and maybe not creating the ability to defeat them in a hardcore attrition battle, but instead creating enough of a threat or enough of a roadblock, that, if you will, that the Chinese will be dissuaded from initiating an act of aggression. So it's going to be a little bit more of a whole of government approach, perhaps, to create this uncertainty and threat for China, rather than strictly a military approach like the national defense strategy of the Trump administration did.
Megan Eckstein in Defense News writes this: those 321 to 372 manned ships would be supplemented by a yet-to-be-determined number of unmanned surface and underwater vessels, between 77 and 140. As a result, the Navy's total fleet could range from 398 manned and unmanned to 512. The chicken and egg and some other thing analogy that I used a moment ago, though, leads with the money, it strikes me. You've always told me to watch the money. And the CNO said this week: based on the top line that we have, we can afford a Navy of about 300 ships. Is all of this discussion moot right now, Bryan, at the budget levels that we're at today?
Yeah, some of this discussion is moot. So I think the shipbuilding plan has in there a little nugget that says the Navy is going to constrain the size of the fleet to align with what it can sustain down the road into the future, which means operations and support funding is going to be a constraint on the fleet design, which is something that we've been pushing for over at Hudson for a while, which means you're going to constrain yourself to about 300 and 320 ships because of the need to pay for the manpower, the maintenance, the fuel, all those things that go along with keeping a fleet operating. So I think on the manned side, we're going to have that hard constraint. And that opens up the potential for maybe on the unmanned side, the Navy can increase its capacity and make up for some of that shortfall on the manned side by using unmanned platforms to get the coverage, to get the persistence, or to get the reach that they would have otherwise gotten by building new platforms or building more of the existing platforms.
Bryan Clark, thanks very much as always. Great to have you back on the program.
Thank you, Francis. Great to see you.